Alright, I'm going to talk about food phobia or food aversion for a few minutes. The only time I've got on national TV was as a result of curing someone of their food phobia. All over the press I was, because the lad, and he was a little lad, was only 6 or 7 years old, and he had a phobia of sauce, which was quirky. You know, that's why the press picked it up. So it was fairly local to me, so I got in touch with the woman through the paper and offered to sort her son out. I didn't know if I could. I'd never worked with someone that young. And to cut a long story short, I did. Took a bunch of sessions, because he was phobic of therapists too, because they'd tried that. They'd approached him gingerly with bottles of ketchup. And he'd screamed, either screamed or he'd run away, or he'd throw up. So I went and pretended to be a family friend and told him bedtime stories. Usually when I work with people, I'm using a combination of NLP, direct mind training things, and hypnosis. In this particular case, I used just hypnosis. In other words, I told him bedtime stories. In this case, I just used hypnosis. Bedtime stories, hypnosis. All stories are hypnotic, especially if they're nice stories. So I went round to their place week after week after week and told him bedtime stories. Inside the stories, there were stories about overcoming fear. They weren't about sauce, because I couldn't mention that because he'd have gone nuts. So I used Ericksonian hypnosis techniques, which are storytelling techniques and embedded commands. And nice stories, and I almost gave up because I'd gone around 7 or 8 times. It hadn't made a difference. So I was thinking, there's nothing I can do. I've tried everything I can think of. And then one time I told him one story, the last time I went to see him, as it turned out, because it worked. It was a story about a little boy who lived with his mum and dad on the edge of a village, and they had a friend, Merlin the wizard, who was a good family friend, obviously, and he took the little boy deep into the forest, and they went up to that magic lake and talked to the magic tree, who told him a story about when he was a boy. When he was a boy, he knew someone who was scared of something. So I'm talking of stories inside of stories inside of stories. So when I get to the point that goes, he then said, the person or the little lad didn't know which he I was referring to. Merlin, the boy, the tree, the person in the boy's story, or the tree story. And I said, do you know what the most magic, he said, do you know what the most magic thing is in the world? The most powerful magic spell. And the little lad's almost asleep in bed. He's kind of half asleep, and he's murmured something. I said, here's the most magic spell. All you need to do is think of the most scary thing in the world, and as you do, you reach up and touch your nose, and you say the word Shazoom. And I touched my nose as I said it. And in his half sleep, he reached from under the quilt and touched his own nose and said Shazoom, and fell asleep. He went bright red and fell asleep. And I thought, I wonder if that's done it, because I kept trying these techniques week after week. And it did it. Next morning he woke up, his mum called me in great excitement and said he demanded sauce on toast for breakfast. And she said no, because she was so freaked out by it, which made him even keener. And suddenly the whole problem was gone. And the miracle cure could have happened the first time if I got the story right. Usually with adults that are averse to foods, that have only eaten 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 things their entire life, or are particularly phobic of fish or cheese or something, it's much easier because I can directly work with them because they're not that scared about it, they can't talk about it. And so I've become a kind of specialist, I guess, in dealing with food aversion and food phobia. It can be extremely easy to deal with. Although usually there's a lot of hesitation goes on as the person begins to try the first thing. Very often there's a fear of gagging. Maybe that when they were younger they choked on something. It doesn't really matter if they remember what it was or it doesn't really matter if they remember that incident or not, assuming there was one. The important thing is that we gently recondition it so that they get over their indecision, fear, and begin to be, and then they're a bit confused about it, and then suddenly they're tasting something new. A little bit of it to begin with and a bit more, and then they'll try something else new and something else, and within a week or 2 or 3 weeks, typically the person who's tried 1 or 2 things will have tried 6 things and then 40 things, and then they're okay. Once you get them aimed at being able to eat comfortably, once you've neutralized the fear, anything's possible, and eating well certainly is. So it isn't just me, that all of us can do this, and I've got colleagues all over the world that are well versed in these techniques, so do get in touch because we can almost certainly help you. Alright, I'm going to talk about food phobia or food aversion.